Hi everyone, and welcome to my HIPAA continuing education course. I decided to make this education course for our office to talk about the guidelines of HIPAA and what HIPAA violations are. So, what is HIPAA? HIPAA is the acronym for the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act that was passed by Congress in 1996. HIPAA does the following. It provides the ability to transfer and continue health insurance coverage for millions of American workers and their families when they change or lose their jobs. It reduces healthcare fraud and abuse. It mandates industry wide standards for healthcare communication on electronic billing and other processes, and it requires the protection and confidential handling of protected health information. So, that at the very bottom, that last one, is kind of what pertains most to us as healthcare providers. It's a big deal for us to follow HIPAA guidelines. So, just some continuation. The HIPAA privacy regulations require healthcare providers and organizations, as well as their business associates, to develop and follow procedures that ensure the confidentiality and security of protected health information, PHI, when it is transferred, received, handled, or shared. This applies to all forms of PHI, including paper, oral, and electronic, etc. Furthermore, only the minimum health information necessary to conduct business is to be used or shared. So there's a lot of different types of HIPAA violations. These are some of the most common ones: keeping unsecured records, unencrypted data, hacking, lack of employee training, gossip or sharing personal information, employee dishonesty, improper disposal of records, unauthorized release of information, and third-party disclosure of patient information. I think probably the most common ones in the dental field, what relate to us, are um, probably improper disposal of records and unauthorized release of information or third party disclosure of patient information. It's really easy for us to disclose names, and especially improper disposal of records. It's really important that we're shredding everything, making sure that no information could possibly get out. That's not what we want to get out. So, we're going to start by categorizing HIPAA violations. Um, I'd categorize the HIPAA violations as either intentional or unintentional, and I'd say most of them are probably unintentional. An example of intentional is spreading gossip about a patient's health information with malicious intent. And I think this is pretty rare that happens. It does happen, but it is pretty rare. An example of unintentional is accidentally throwing a piece of paper away that had not been shredded, that had a patient's information on it, or accidentally talking about patient care within earshot of another patient. Both forms are violating HIPAA and should be avoided. However, the punishment for them would be different. So, continuing with the types of penalties that we could have. So, most violations would be considered civil and would be dealt with by the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Civil Rights. These would fall under one of four tiers. So, Tier 1, as you can see, applies to individuals who did not know HIPAA rules were being violated or, by exercising a reasonable level of diligence, would not have about violation of HIPAA. The minimum penalty is $100 per violation, up to a maximum of $25,000 for repeat violations. Tier 2 applies to reasonable cause, which has a minimum fine of $1,000 per violation, up to $100,000 for repeat violations. And going back to this past slide, I also put a picture up there on the upper right, just talking about the different tiers. It's a good visual. So continuing on with that, though, I added another visual here for you. Tier 3 applies to violations involving willful neglect of HIPAA rules. When the violation has been corrected within the required time period, the minimum fine is $10,000 per violation, up to a maximum of $250,000 for repeat violations. And then Tier 4 is reserved for willful neglect of HIPAA rules with no attempt to correct the violation. Excuse me, my screen kind of blacked out a little bit. Okay. The minimum penalty is $50,000 per violation, up to a maximum of $1.5 million for repeat violations, which is a lot. The maximum penalty, regardless of the tier, is $50,000 per violation with a cap of $1.5 million. So, lots of different tiers. Most common ones, though, are probably Tier 1 and Tier 2, since they're people that did not know about the rules. So the most rare kind of penalty is criminal penalty. This most of the time happens when people are doing things to violate guidelines for, malicious intent of some form. So there are three different tiers as well to these, and these are more extreme, as you can see. A fine of up to $50,000 on tier one, a fine of $100,000 and 5 years in prison on tier two, and $250,000 and 10 years of prison on tier three. Like I said, this is pretty rare though, but it must have happened for this to be a thing. So when I look at our office specifically, there's two areas where I'm seeing some violations. The first violation is we keep a printed copy of our schedules up on the wall with the patient's names on it, and it's helpful for us to be able to see that throughout the day. However, it is a HIPAA violation because the patients could turn around and see that list and see the names. So I think the best thing that we could do is put that list on the inside of one of the drawers, put it on the inside of a counter or a cabinet, something like that. That way we can still have access to it, but that way we're not violating HIPAA guidelines. So that's an easy fix. Second violation that I see is with our op rooms being so close together, it's super easy for us to talk loud, and when we're discussing patient care and for the patients in the op rooms to be able to hear us. And so these patients could be hearing treatment that needs to happen on the patient next door. We could be saying names. And so I think it's just important that we as a team are really cognizant of that and making sure that we are not talking too loudly and that we go down the hall and away from the op rooms if we do need to discuss patient care. So in conclusion, it's very important to uphold the guidelines for HIPAA, not only to just avoid the fines, but also just to take care of our patients. I always think if I wouldn't want my information spread to others, then why in the world would I be okay, doing these things if it's going to cause information to be spread that's not meant to be spread. So I think we should make sure that we're working as a team together. We want to be accountable to each other and make sure that we are all following the guidelines and preventing any issues. I think this PowerPoint here is a really good way for us to, just be refreshed on HIPAA guidelines and make sure that we're aware of all these things. So that way we can make some changes and get things a little bit better in the future. So thank you guys for watching. And here is my references. And then here are the references for the pictures.